Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pathways to Grade Level Literacy webinar. We are pleased that you are joining us this morning. I'm Lee D'Amico. I'm a research faculty member in the College of Education at the University of South Carolina, and we have been working with the South Carolina State Library on the Literacy 2030 initiative for a few years. I hope some of you are familiar with Literacy 2030, which focuses on the goal of improved literacy in South Carolina by the year 2030. In our initial Literacy 2030 work, we developed frameworks and structures based on feedbacks from libraries, maybe including some of you, literacy experts, and others. And through this work, we decided to look at the continuum of literacy using 4 strands: early literacy, grade level literacy, teen literacy, and adult literacy. We realize there are overlaps within these strands, and we know many people may have their particular focus area, but we wanted to spotlight one area of literacy each year as we build the connective framework across all areas of literacy. Last year, we focused on early literacy and developed data points, explored promising practices, held regional meetings, and provided resources related to early literacy, generally what happens before school entry. Now we are moving our focus to grade level literacy as children enter school and progress through the elementary and early middle grades. This webinar kicks off our grade level literacy focus as our presenters will feature ideas related to the pathways of literacy development within the spectrum of early literacy and grade level literacy. We are pleased with the partnership with the Institute for Child Success in hosting this webinar and the distinguished presenters, Dr. Janice Gruendel and Keller Anne Ruble. Dr. Gruendel has more than 20 years of experience in Connecticut government, working on issues related to children and families and serving in the administration of 5 governors. She is a member of the Harvard Center on the Developing Child's Frontiers of Innovation Initiative. She holds a PhD in developmental psychology from Yale. She has a master's in educational psychology and a bachelor's in sociology. Keller Anne Ruble is a consultant for the Institute for Child Success and served as the Associate Director of Policy Research at the Institute until recently. She has extensive experience in policy and research related to improved outcomes for children and families. She was also a 7th grade teacher in Memphis, Tennessee. She holds a master's degree in urban education policy from Brown University and an undergraduate degree from Clemson University. Please join me in welcoming these 2 presenters who will highlight work in North Carolina related to pathways to grade level literacy and help us think about research and practice related to literacy. Janice, I'll turn it to you.
That's great. Good morning. Thank you all for signing on. We are so excited to be walking through the library door in this really important work. Keller Anne, and she'll describe the Pathways Initiative. We worked for about 9 months on that project with the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation to try and figure out which elements of children's lives actually contributed to 3rd grade literacy. We have broken our presentation today into a couple parts. So I'll take the first part and talk a little bit about context setting. Keller Anne will jump in and talk about the pathways. Then I will gallop you through some important information from the neuroscience of early child development, and then I'll pass it back to Keller Anne. With regard to what we can do next, what you can do next, and what we can do next together. Keller Anne's going to click us through, so I may occasionally say click, and we have embedded 2 videos. You guys are going way too fast for me here.
Sorry, that's my fault.
That's okay. So you want to back up just for a minute here. Okay, so Keller Anne, on this one, did we lose the context? So you can click for me now. There should be a piece that says establishing the context, and that I don't see that.
Oh no. Should I pause this really quickly and
yes,
find that? Great.
Yes. Would you mind everybody just hang with us for 1 second? There should be 4 parts.
Thank you so much for your patience, everybody.
You might have just popped over the not the latest version of this. So for folks, while you're listening, and Keller Anne runs up the last one of these that we created, we usually start by establishing a context that is expectations that we have as a nation for young children, for their schooling, for economic security. And then what we do is come back to the particular state or community or jurisdiction that we're working with. There you go. Thank you. That we're working with to ask what it is we really want. So this presentation is structured in exactly that way. So you'll see the 4 parts, and I'll start with we envision an America where, and you could click for me now, Keller Anne. So we envision an America where all children grow up healthy, safe, smart, and strong. And click, please. We're not there yet. Would you click again? Good. And we envision a nation where all kids are reading at grade level as measured by the 3rd grade. Click again, please. We're not there yet either. And I think usually if I'm doing this work with folks, I stop and ask, is there agreement? And pretty much no matter where you go around the country, there are agreement on all of the slides in this section. And it says to us we've made progress, but we have a way to go, and we all understand that. You could click this. This slide is a real slide. The pictures, there are 3 of them. They are real pictures. They're not photoshopped. Some of them are from the South and others of them are from the North. And they reflect the world that we live in right now. And a statement that these circumstances really hurt everything, families, children, literacy, and all of that. So that establishes a context. Would you click, please? So then the question is, as I had said in the beginning, how are we doing in South Carolina? We rank 38th in child well-being among all the 50 states. That's Kids Count data. And this is your data. 7 in 10 of our 3rd graders are not yet proficient in reading. So like the country, we're not where we want to be on those first 2 measures. Would you click again? The next 2 slides are very new. Yesterday, or Sunday perhaps, the New York Times published an amazing article on the new Opportunity Passport, Opportunity Atlas. This is taken from that. You can just Google Opportunity Atlas and look at any state and any county, and you can look down to your own street and look at how children are doing, disaggregated by race if you wish to do that, in terms of growing up in families with low or very low incomes. I share this slide and the next one, because when you look across the nation, the greatest number of jurisdictions, states and counties and cities where children are still living with low or very low income, which we'll show you is related then to how well they're doing in reading, is in the South, and the South through Texas and into the Midwest. So there's South Carolina. Could you click again? This is what happens when you click, and you can dig in and you can look at any town. You can click into the town and look at parts of the town. And when you do this, you find some stunning information about how families are actually living within the context of family income and also opportunity. I invite you to do that. If you do it in the evening, I guarantee you won't sleep much, because you're going to be so entranced by what you can do and very easily through this set of this new resource which is there. So that takes me from what we envision as a nation and where we are to what we think we envision for South Carolina. And I'll turn it over to Keller Anne now.
Thank you so much, Janice. And thank you so much, Lee and the South Carolina State Library, for inviting us to speak with you today. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk, and thank you so much for your interest. It's actually very exciting for me to speak with you today. Growing up in South Carolina, the library was my most favorite place of all, including the Richland County Library with the Where the Wild Things Are, a huge mural. And my hand is actually in the Lexington County Library, my little handprint. So it's nice that this has come full circle. To give you just a brief introduction on the Institute for Child Success, we're a nonpartisan policy research organization dedicated to the success of young children, and we take a very broad view of that. We're headquartered in Gruendel, South Carolina, and really anchor all of our work in the brain science of child development with an equity lens. and recognize that children don't grow up in isolation from their parents. And so we need to look broadly across disciplines, across sectors, to ways in which children best can develop and flourish and grow to their fullest potential, which leads us into this North Carolina Pathways work. We, Janice and I, worked with North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation on the Pathways to Grade Level Reading initiative. This initiative is a multi-year, multi-stakeholder initiative that asked really 3 questions around possibility. And North Carolina, the stakeholders wanted to know what would be possible if the state adopted shared measures that put children on a pathway to grade level reading from birth, that ask what would happen if they coordinated strategies to support children's development from that prenatal period to when they get into 3rd grade, and what if the policies and practices were rooted in the science of child development. This was a really kind of monumental initiative undertaken by the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation, NC Child, which is the Annie E. Casey recipient of North Carolina, and the Best NC, which is a business partnership in North Carolina. Best NC really spurred this on and recognized that in the long term, North Carolina children needed to be on a path towards reading on grade level by 3rd grade, so that by the time they graduate high school, they're ready for college or postgraduate experience and ready to enter the workforce with those skills necessary to be really successful in an advanced economy. So this work took a number of different teams, stakeholders, and segments. They started with data and really wanted to develop measures of success. So these measures centered in 3 big buckets: children's health and development beginning at birth, supported and supportive families and communities, and high quality birth to 8 learning environments with regular attendance. These data teams developed metrics to track each measure, each of these 12 measures that you see here. And then that's where Janice and my work came in. We were tasked with developing a set of working papers around each measure and really unpacking the why each measure was important to children's development, what the interconnectedness was between all the other measures, and how those measures, what were the evidence-based policies, practices, and programs under each measure to strategize around moving towards better supports for children and families that would help their overall literacy. These have been adopted at the state and local level and have some really powerful partners. The many legislators are on board. This has been codified in their budget in 2016, 17, and 18. SAS, which is a major data analytics company, has developed a data tracking platform pro bono for this initiative so that the state can really get at a granular level, understand the progress that they're making towards 3rd grade reading. To walk you through our papers, these are really pretty flexible tools that we hope could be useful to you as you explore any subtopic of literacy as community anchors, as the community anchors that you are. So this was, this paper was the Reading with Children paper, and this just highlights the common structure of each. We walk through kind of what the paper is about, why it matters for children, and then we move into how this measure is interconnected with each other measure, and then how the strategies identified in this measure will amplify the other kind of areas of child development. And then we walk through the policy options, the practice strategies, and the programmatic opportunities that are shown by the evidence to improve that measure of, with this one, reading with children. So we've highlighted several different programs at the bottom here that are specifically focused on children's literacy. You might recognize some of them. Some of them are community initiatives. And then we conclude by really just summing up and highlighting back to the big picture of why this is important. And as I said, all of these are evidence informed. We took a lot of time and care to highlight those strategies and those policy practice and policy options that had really robust research behind them or tested and proven evidence. That was something really important to North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation and to ICS. All of these papers are free and available online, and we hope that they can be useful tools both to you and to your community partners who are looking to get just a little bit more information on the what and the why behind child development. We recognize that a lot of our information in early childhood is pretty siloed based on health or certain subcomponents of child development. And so we thought this would be a really amazing opportunity to create sort of a one-stop shop about how children's development is really spread out across a broad number of domains, but that children really need the comprehensive supports in place to really thrive and flourish. So we hope these are helpful tools for you in this really incredible landmark Literacy 2030 initiative. Here we highlight how just really interconnected the measures are and how they all work together to advance third grade reading success, which we know is a proxy measure for a long-term on-track trajectory for positive education, health, and economic outcomes. And finally, the pathways work, this leads into Janice's conversation, that when children experience trauma, when they experience toxic stress or adverse childhood experiences, it really does put some barriers in place towards their path towards learning and literacy. We know that their physical health, their social emotional health is so critically important to making sure they're on track to entering in kindergarten, healthy, thriving, ready to learn. And that if they don't have those positive experiences, and if there is adversity in their early life, that we as a community, as a society, and in our own sections and silos can work together to address and build resiliency factors. So now I'll turn it over to Janice, who's going to walk us through the neuroscience of brain development.
That's great. Keller Anne, can you go backwards one slide? I'd just like to add one point onto your point. That was a great presentation, by the way. So one of the interesting learnings for both Keller Anne and for me, but also for the folks who hired ICS to do this, was that one tends to think of two particular areas of sort of silver bullets to third grade reading. And one is, okay, so what's your reading curriculum? And the other one is universal preschool. And both of those are important program areas. But what we found by looking deeply across all of these indicators was that, first of all, there are lots of other things that are determinative in whether children come to school in a position unburdened by trauma and adversity. And secondly, that whether they're actually able to take advantage to whatever it is the reading curriculum is, there are good ones and better ones, is determined by lots of other things. So of those 12 indicators, there are only a couple that were in people's minds when we started. And it was a bit of a slog up a hill for all of us to realize the incredibly important role of families, the role of community, the role of factors that we call social determinants now, that is the experiences that people bring into this process of early childhood learning and literacy. So it was a stunning project. It's not surprising to me in retrospect. We thought it would never end, right, Keller Anne? It took 9 months. So it was a birthing process for us, and we're very happy to share it with you. I think you could use it in South Carolina, because while we were tasked to look at what works in North Carolina, the research that we did was national in scope and research independent of state. So I think if you have people interested, it can be a very good resource for you as well. So let me take you now, if we'll go forward, into the question of what we know from the rapidly more public, rapidly expanding and increasingly more public knowledge about children's brains, how they develop, and how that can help promote and facilitate the kinds of learning that enables children to be reading in third grade, or hinder that development in really important ways. So while you could teach a whole course on this, and some of you may have, I'm going to gallop us through and share a couple of resources, and then I can direct you to a couple other resources. So first of all, we learned from the pathways, and we know, those of us who actually live and work, I shouldn't say actually, who live and work in communities, that all families face some adversities, right? It's hard to have kids, it's hard to raise them, and some families face a lot more. This particular slide, you can click again, is based on work that comes from the federal government in a review of child neglect. So what are they thinking about when they try to make sense of this category they call child neglect? And there are 3 buckets: family basic needs, the parents' health and mental health, and then children's behavior, health and mental health. These sort of subcategories, those are ones we all recognize. I don't usually read them through. I will give you a second to look at them. There's nothing there that will surprise you, but it makes the point that all of us at some point face stressors, and that some families face a whole lot of stressors. You can click for me now. So what we know is that there's all kinds of stress, and we need stress. We need stress to protect ourselves. It happens every day. It's part of the biological chemical flow in our bodies, and it's not a bad thing. If we didn't have stress, we wouldn't get stressed out about the test we have, or be worried about things, and it wouldn't motivate us to act. So Harvard, in the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, in doing this work, has created a 3-level, stop right there, Keller, a 3-level typology. The first is normal stress, and you can see what that is. The second is tolerable stress, which involves things like a serious illness, when someone you love and know closely dies, a very frightening accident. Importantly, acrimonious divorce. Sometimes divorce works easily for children, and other times it's horrid. And even things like persistent discrimination. That's tolerable, and it means that the body, a child's body, is activated and aggravated by certain body chemicals. I'll show you which ones. And then after the event has happened, the body chemical level goes back down, and the child is sort of more normal. That kind of stress, while very significant, is tolerable unless It is not buffered. And the research is really clear on this, not buffered by a caring, actively present adult, or if it's an adult who's receiving this kind of stress, peers, so a social network. That's called toxic stress. It's a word we all use now. It's become very familiarized. And it's like your body's, if you thought of your body as a car engine, it's your body's stress system, that fight, flight, or freeze reaction that we have when cortisol is running through our bodies. It's like that was activated all the time, sort of like a car engine's revving for hours and hours and hours. Would you click? That's really bad for our bodies. And this is the new knowledge that we have that we really didn't have in a biochemical, sort of the biology of stress way. What we know now is this constant flow of cortisol, where the level does not go down, causes damage in our bodies. It's not, it really at the cellular level. It impacts our health and our mental health negatively. And this is a new finding and really a significant one, I think. We can pass this change in the cellular level of our bodies from one generation, from me as the mom or dad, to my children. And what it doesn't change our DNA, but in all of our cells, there are little switches. They are actually electronic. I have my finger in front of me, switching back and forth. You can't see me. But what happens when a child is under this kind of stress is that switch gets stuck open. So the child is running all the time with high levels of cortisol, and it causes them to fight or flight or freeze, depending on children and gender. Would you click now? I want to show you a very quick video. It's 1 minute. It's from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. I'm a Yalie, so it pains me to say, hey, they did a really good thing here, but they did. So let's show that little video.
And change presenter.
Oh, come on.
There we go. You should be hearing sounds, so if you don't, raise your hand or something. I'm not hearing sound. So how about if I give you the sound? That's a body. And what it's showing you is body functions, cortisol flowing through the body. Cortisol is that gets you moving, fight, flight, or fight, flight, or freeze, that it causes a child great stress when it happens. And when it is chronic, that is toxic, it actually impacts on the child and their behavior and their brain. And that's what all those pictures are showing you. There's a thump in this video that is supposed to replicate your heart's beating. And when you listen to it, please go online and listen to it. When you get the PowerPoint, it'll all be hot linked. You can feel this in your body as a listener and a viewer. I'll just let you look for a minute because it's pretty graphic, and then we'll just pop out of it. These are the 3 parts of your brain, all necessary. This is what happens to neurons and synapses when in fact cortisol is in charge of your system. Connections that should be strong in terms of reasoning and learning actually pair away and are weakened. So cortisol has that impact of changing the structure, especially of young children's brains, but also how their brain functions. This piece of the documentary, the little video, just says, look, we can buffer that. And it requires a caring, present adult. It could be a teacher. It might be you guys in terms of your relationship in the community, and it is certainly a parent. Could we click back to the PowerPoint, please? Great. So Keller Anne, can you take us to where we were in the slides?
Yes. Are you seeing my screen?
I'm seeing your screen, but I'm also seeing all the slides on the side. So it's not in view mode, I think.
Oh. Great. Here we go.
Perfect. So would you go back one? So this is where we were, that there are all kinds of stress, that some of it's normal, some of it's not, some of it's heavy duty and it impacts us, but it is time limited, and some is toxic, which is chronic, going all the time when not buffered by an adult. Could you click now? So in order to talk to folks about brain development, in one slide, right, not a whole course, we created what we call the Arc of Science. So this is something we've built, and we use it to talk about it. You are welcome to use it if you decide you're interested in these slides and you want to do a presentation of your own. If you take these slides, please just cite back to the Institute for Child Success. And let me tell you what's on this slide. We call it the Arc of Science because it's an arc. The yellow sunbursts are good. I'm going to use really simple language here. The blue are not so good. And in fact, they're actually pretty bad for the developing brain. So if you start at the bottom, what we know for all people is that cognitive, social, emotional development is all linked together in your brain. It's the neurons that are connected by synapses. You've seen what happens when cortisol runs. When children are very young, in the first 3 years of life, they are very busy building their brains. And by the age of 3, their brain is about 85% structured and functioning. What fills in is the coding of experiences. In our lives as teachers or parents, perhaps as librarians, we're interested in some special parts of that work. You'll notice literacy is not on there. It could be on there. We are looking at executive function and self-regulation, which is really how do children learn to manage their lives, plan their behaviors, control impulses, focus in. That's behavior that begins to develop when children are very young. It isn't completely developed until 25 or 26 years of age, and there's a burst in that development during the teenage years, although if you have a teenager, you sort of wonder about that. We're also focusing newly on empathy, which in the world we're in, I think is a really good thing. And research is showing us that we can find empathetic behaviors on the part of 2-year-olds. So this is all good. It's all normal. It's with regard to all of us, our children and our grandchildren. When children or families are living in trauma, or toxic stress, or ACEs, which will show you what those are, that impacts on the development of the brain. You saw that in the short video. It can delay development, it can create developmental delays, it can cause children's behaviors to feel out of control, and it's not a good thing, but it happens to everybody at some point. When children and families live in poverty, you can click, or with racism, implicit bias, huge inequity, and frankly, all of us in the world of politics right now, when that lays on top of trauma and stress, it's a pile-on, and children's development is dramatically negatively impacted. And you may know families in your communities who live with these sort of structural pieces. So when we look at vulnerable children and children who are not reading, particularly not reading in the 3rd grade, we find a really lot of them are between those 2 blue dots, and that the normal development hasn't occurred apace where we would expect it to. Now we know that. It took us a long time to get there. That's not where we stop. We're moving in this arc of science to be focused on how do we support children and families to control the biological stressors in their body, to generate positive hormones, oxytocin, not OxyContin, dopamine, if you're a runner, endorphins. We can build that in our bodies ourselves. So we're working with children and families to create conditions where mindfulness can be developed, where we can actually promote health and hope and happiness. And then when we look at the relationships among us, we can create resilience. And resilience is simply strength in the face of adversity. So that's the arc of science. That's the neuroscience in a slide. And it really helps us to understand factors which impact on third grade reading and, frankly, behaviors that we see among children and sometimes adults. Would you click for me? Now, this is going to be an adventure. I want to show you, I want to talk to you for a minute about ACEs, and then I'd like to show you a 5-minute video that is a very short version of the long resilience documentary that I hope you now have licensed and I hope you will screen. There are 10 categories of ACEs. They fall into either abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual, neglect, physical or emotional. I, by the way, as a child development person, hate the word neglect because we're learning that it is most often not willful neglect. It has to do with families living under huge stress without basic necessities. And then there are 5 categories of things that are going to look really familiar to all of us. And they are having someone in the family who's experiencing mental illness. It is often depression. In young moms, it is very often depression. And if you're a young mom living in low-income circumstances with all of the stress that goes with that, it can be 60% of those moms. So that's an important one. When that happens, children don't have the engagement with parents that they need to acquire normal development, early literacy, and even third grade reading. When a mom has been engaged in domestic violence, you kind of only have to be on the news today to understand the power of that. When there is divorce or separation that is acrimonious, when a relative is in prison, and when there's substance abuse in a family. People have now taken 20 years to study those 10 forms of adverse childhood experiences, and they find that they have an impact that is immediate, dramatic, and can last for the lifetime of a person, resulting in all kinds of chronic illnesses that many of us experience. Now we can click, we're going to try and click here and take you to that. If that one doesn't work, I think we'll just go past it, okay, Lee? And then people can look at it themselves because I can't talk my way through that one.
Okay. Yeah, the audio is not working, so we have technical difficulty with getting the audio from the video, so they'll just have to watch it through the slide.
That's fine. So if you can take us back then to that slide, and we'll go on to the next one.
All right.
Now I'm seeing the slide deck, but I'm on the first one, and I'm not seeing it in slideshow mode.
We're changing presenters real quick.
No problem.
It says paused. Why is it paused? Oh, it's. Yes, I know. Maybe?
Great. The story of ACEs tells us 2 things important that are generalizable, and then a series of facts about development and outcomes that are stunning. The first thing that we learn from this 5-minute primer on ACEs is that the early years really matter. So that insults and adversity and toxic stress and trauma that are not buffered by a present, positive, caring adult, like regularly present, that it impacts on children's brain development. And while brain development continues and brain functioning can be remediated, it takes a lot more effort, it is a lot more expensive, and it would just be much better for everyone to build it right, create conditions where we build it right in the early years. Libraries are fundamental to that because that's where people come to read to their children, to be together, to learn together, and I hope you'll look at that closely. The second generalized finding, that's a click, is really important. Even when we have adversity, we can build health and hope through inside processes like mindfulness and centering, and we can build resilience by supporting ourselves through self-care, that's inside, and social networks, that's outside. Resilience is a process that happens when more than one people are together. Now, what we do know is that if a person takes the ACEs screen, those 10, identifies how many of those they have. If they have 4 or more of those different ACEs categories, the ones that are right in front of you, they have a dramatic increase in health challenges, in lack of readiness for school, in behavioral problems, in all the way through school, and then in a very dramatic increase in heart disease and obesity and diabetes and heart failure. So we know that not attending to this is a really significant health issue, and it's dependent on the world we create around children and families. There is one line in the big documentary, which I implore you to look at and screen for your community. A woman who looks like a college-educated woman who's not a person of color. She's at one of these events and she stands up and she took her own ACEs score and she said, listen, this was stunning for me to know, to reflect back on how I have grown up, and what I have learned is that we are the sum total of our life experiences. At whatever point we look, we are the sum total of our life experiences. So if we're looking at 3rd grade reading and we look through the lens of ACEs and children's social, emotional, and general development, wherever we are along this, from birth to 5 to 8 years old to old, we are a sum total of what has happened to us. And that's the lesson of ACEs. It's very powerful, and I hope you'll look at it. Would you click? Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Keller Anne, where we want to talk about what can we do that's better than the best we've done so far, now that we know this.
Great. So there are quite a number of activities and programs and opportunities for libraries and other community institutions that can really help build community awareness and resilience factors. And the first is hosting a screening of resilience. And Lee shared earlier this morning that the state library has purchased the streaming rights to host the screening of resilience. It's an incredibly powerful documentary that centers on the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's really pioneered a lot of this understanding of ACEs in young children, and then how we can put in place protective factors that buffer that toxic stress and really facilitate thriving in the face of adversity. So the screening itself is very powerful. Janice also does a really neat walkthrough of the neuroscience, and then ends on this concept of hope and resilience. You can facilitate community conversations. So the facilitator guide, the documentary is understandably very sobering, and it requires a little bit more than just watching it and then going home. Sometimes we need to really work through and process through and kind of talk as a community what this looks like in our own spaces and places, and then how we can think through better supporting the children and families in our community that may have some of these adverse experiences, trauma, or toxic stress. We've done a number of these screenings across South Carolina, most recently in Rock Hill, that have had some really powerful conversations afterwards. I think the Rock Hill screening had some members of their local law enforcement, their school district superintendents, to really address this from a cross-discipline perspective. You can, in your libraries, promote access to parent-friendly resources. We know that y'all have a number of different literacy curriculums that you're promoting. there are so many different resources that parents can just understand a little bit more about their own stress levels, what stress levels their child may be experiencing, and ways that the adults in their lives can really focus on their stress levels first so they can be the best caregivers for the children in their lives. Then another great resource we wanted to highlight are online reading programs. Dorchester has put these videos up on YouTube walking through stories, and we think that's a really incredible and exciting opportunity to our new kind of media platform to promote literacy and reading engagement for parents and caregivers alike. We've also posted a couple of other resources and good examples for libraries across the country doing this, different community organizations. One new resource that I'd like to highlight is the Media Mentorship in Libraries Serving Youth. That's a new set of publications, programmatic examples, video resources that was conducted by the New America Foundation, a think tank in Washington, D.C. And they've done a lot of different studies in libraries and really unpacked, how parents are using libraries in this digital age. How can libraries really help parents navigate the complex worlds of literacy, some of the new technologies that are coming through to help them be better parents and help their kids learn and grow a little bit more. We also wanted to highlight over on the left, Read Charlotte, a really multidisciplinary stakeholder group that has been working to advance literacy in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, and Janice can speak a little bit more to that. But these just links will be helpful after the webinar if you want to continue diving in and exploring different options that are right for your communities and your libraries.
I'll add, Keller, and I'll just add one word. The Read Charlotte one is quite interesting because in Charlotte, a very large group of business people got together and decided that by 2025, they wanted all of children reading at third grade level. And the data is not strong, so they have a Gallup to make that happen. And the reason I cite it here is because they began, it's multi-agency, very strong partnerships, lots of family engagement, and it seems to hinge on an incredibly strong partnership with the library system in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. So it's one that you can take a look. The website doesn't describe that, but I've been meeting with them, so that's why I didn't hot link it. There is a website, you can look at Read Charlotte, but in talking with the folks who are moving this initiative forward, including with business participation and money, which is not something we always have, the library partnership has been extraordinarily necessary and stunning in terms of being in there from the beginning and opening up the whole of their library and learning process to this effort. So it kind of blew me away to see where you could go as Keller Anne and I were preparing to share this information with you.
Great. Well, and we really zoomed through a lot of this content that was at times pretty dense. So we'd love to take some of your questions now and address any, clarify, go deeper, that sort of thing. So Lee, I think the questions are they should type in questions in the chat box, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Questions or thoughts or ideas that you've had or support you need, please share the chat box.
Or the question box.
Or the question box.
Lee, while we're waiting to do that, so for people who are still on the webinar, I have created a PowerPoint that I will send the URL for to Lee, and she can send it out to you, to everyone who came, or to anyone who wants it. And it's a combination of materials relative to using the big documentary Resilience, or the small version that I was going to show you that's only 5 minutes. You are welcome. It's called Resilience Tips, Tools, and Resources. And please open it up and use anything that's there, because if you decide to go through this door, I think it will make the process incredibly rich. And it does result in community conversations that sometimes have had a hard time getting started. So you may find it serves you in many different ways.
Yeah, and I would just like to add too, as a South Carolina native, I think the conversation about trauma, about community violence and adverse experiences is something that we don't like to talk about in any way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, domestic violence is incredibly rampant in South Carolina. When children experience their caregivers or their caregivers' partners and they're abused, they themselves are more likely to be abused. And really, it's something that it's come to a tipping point. South Carolina has led the country in every single year of record keeping in instances of domestic violence, and it's something that if we do not address and if we do not tackle head on, that it's just going to continue. And libraries as community centers are really strong anchors in our communities, and really walking through the door of toxic stress and resilience can open a conversation for that, with children at the center, so that we can start to bring this issue to light more, and really hopefully ameliorate that in our great state.
It looks like there are no questions at this time, or no comments, but if you have comments as you reflect on this, or if you're doing things within your libraries, your communities, other settings, please email State Library or me at the University of South Carolina, and we'll add those email addresses to this presentation as well, because we would love to get some ideas from you to share among others, or some things you're struggling with, anything that we can help work through this across our state. And I will turn it over to Denise Lyons now for the closing.
Thank you. On behalf of Literacy 2030 Initiative, the South Carolina State Library, and our colleagues from USC and ICS, thank you for attending the webinar on grade level reading, and specifically the work of the NC Pathways. This webinar is the first in a series of 3 webinars, and our next one will be set for January 2019 on the topic of summer reading. You will also be receiving a link to a short evaluation, and we would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes and share some of your feedback about this webinar with us. We will also share the PowerPoint slides and be posting them on the web, on our web page, and so we will notify you when all of that is up and ready, and we will also send you information when registration is open for the next webinar. Thank you very much.